However, I've also been asked to take a late report, which is largely technical and relates to the financial closure of Dalbeattie Learning Campus. Copies of the paper should have been handed out. If you haven't got one, we'll get one to you now. And I'll take the item at the end of business, and I'll allow members a recess if they wish to consider the contents. Okay? Rona, Sederunt apologies, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Leader. We have apologies from Councillors Diggle, Ferguson, Gilroy and Smith. We are expecting Councillors Dykes and McGregor, and Councillor Crothers, Ian Crothers, has sent a message that he'll be with us in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, any declarations of interest? Stephen?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, it's actually item 7. Much as I welcome the report coming to the committee today, up until the end of last year I was a trustee for the Lockerbie Swimming Pool Trust, and I feel it would be appropriate if I were to declare an interest and remove myself from the debate.
Okay, anybody else? Can we move on to item 3, which is the minute of the meeting, the 17th of November. This is just for noting. Okay, if you move on to item 4, which is the local governance finance settlement. This report gives members an overview of the finance settlement for local government announced by the Scottish Government on the 16th of December. Members will recall that at the full council on the 17th of December, we were informed that the settlement would likely mean a significant further reduction in the resources available to our council, and that further checking was required before the scale of this could be confirmed. We were also provided with information on the likely impact of a range of reductions. Although the Scottish Government grant from the UK Government increased by 0.7%, a cash increase but a real terms reduction, the Scottish Government has chosen to cut significantly both in cash terms and real terms the grants to local government. At paragraph 3.7 of the report, we have confirmation that the settlement will see our resources reduced by 4.5%, bringing our savings in the next financial year to over £21 million. This means that we are now in a position of having to identify over £13 million of cuts over and above those savings we already agreed. The scale of this and the impact in the region cannot be underestimated. I note that in paragraph 3.6 that had the Scottish Government used the distribution formula to determine how they would impose their cuts on councils, we would have seen a reduction of 3.53%. However, given the scale of the cuts, the Government have taken the decision to cap the cuts at 4.5%, but not to provide any funding to do so. What this means in practical terms is that our council and some others will be subsidising other councils who would have seen a bigger percentage reduction under the distribution formula. The cost of this subsidy raises our cuts from 3.53% to 4.5%. No one will of course be surprised to see our region unfairly penalised again. It is worth pointing out that if the council settlement had moved in line with the 0.7% increase in grant from the UK to the Scottish Government, our council would have received a cash increase of approximately £2 million rather than a £13.2 million reduction. The savings requirement would therefore have been reduced to £5.993 million, and given that we have already identified £8.1 million of savings, we would actually have had £2 million more to spend. However, that's not going to happen. The Scottish Government wrote to councils on the 16th of December with details of the settlement, as well as outlining the requirements attached to the deal. These requirements are set out on page 12 at 3.10. Council leaders were asked to make it clear by the 22nd of January whether we accept the terms of the financial settlement for our council. COSLA have understandably advised councils against doing so for a number of valid reasons. As officers have highlighted in the report, there remains uncertainty as to the specific requirements. The requirement in relation to the use of the annual £250 million funding allocated to the health and social care integration and our local share of £7.6 million have also still to be clarified. The Deputy First Minister has indicated that the Integrated Joint Board can use these resources to support local social care services. However, to date, we have not seen the detail of what this requirement actually means when it comes to how much we have to allocate to health and social care. Likewise, the conditions and offer of maintaining teacher numbers are far from clear, as they effectively refer to a national phrase, with no information confirming otherwise, if this means that individual councils individual council have to maintain their numbers at last year's levels. So we don't actually know what the teacher numbers means, because we have no information confirming otherwise. But what happened and what happened actually this year with us might happen again, or what the implications are around about that. COSLA have advised that given the draconian scale, this is theirs. COSLA has advised that given the draconian scale of the cuts and the lack of clarity in the conditions, leaders should consider writing to the Finance Secretary explaining that until clarity of teacher numbers and the use of £250 million for health and social care is received, and until councils have had time to complete a balanced budget, our council cannot determine whether it can agree to the requirements set. Paul's here to answer any questions arising from the report, and then I'll open up to the members. Paul, have you anything further to add? Or okay, members? Jane?
Well, Leader, I was actually just going to ask you about the whole teacher issue, because it's honestly not clear to me about what is or is not going to be the case. And I have to say, I think there's probably a recognition that it's really pretty inequitable, the way that this has fallen on particularly rural councils, where one day's audit has shown that we were down by however many it was, 10 or something, despite the fact that we had been trying to recruit. There was no determination, or there was no effort to reduce the number of teachers. We were trying to comply with what was being agreed. But then to penalise us, I mean, £300,000 is £300,000 of cuts we have to find somewhere else. And I'm absolutely with you if you were going to say to the Scottish Government, we really think that this should be thought about again. It seems to me to be penalising particularly rural areas and showing a lack of understanding about how difficult it is to recruit. So I hope it's slightly voice of reason, but it's also actually a certain sense of rising anger about the way that we're being treated from the central side of things.
I think you're absolutely correct in in what you're saying. Unfortunately, the feedback I'm getting from the Scottish Government now, they won't have a look at that again. Whatever you read in the press, you're absolutely correct. Whatever spin's being put on it in the press, we've done 37 things to try and recruit teachers to rural areas, and we've got the second lowest in mainland Scotland people-teacher ratio, and we're still being penalised, and we're being penalised for being a rural area with our own difficulties within that. But I don't think that £300,000 will be revisited. But the announcement that's been made by the Scottish Government is a national target. Now we don't know what this means for the future. So that's some of the clarity that we actually need what that means, so we can actually look at our budget and see what's needed and the implications of that whenever that information comes. COSLA at the moment is actually speaking with the Scottish Government over the next week or so, and hopefully further details will come forward on that. But at the moment, we just can't do it. We can't set a budget. We don't have details on the £250 million teachers and other issues regarding that, and they're still in negotiations with the Scottish Government to see how it goes from there. But I'll let Paul come in on the £300,000 if you want.
Just to say, in the £300,000, that's now been a confirmed deduction from our grant allocation for the current financial year. But it is important to recognise it doesn't impact on subsequent financial years. Our share of the £10 million is actually still in place, provided we meet the requirements, which, as the leader says, are still to be clarified. But provided we meet the requirements, we'll get a share of that £10 million next year. Just in terms of clarifying the requirements and the potential penalties, I think my understanding is that the next meeting with the Deputy First Minister is next Wednesday, next political meeting. There are officer meetings in advance of that, but I think there's a real need to address a number of the uncertainties at the moment, because councils are starting to talk about the challenges of meeting the requirements in the settlement, so they're very keen to get a handle on the detail of those requirements and any penalties related to not meeting those.
Any other Ivor?
Chair, to ask us to sign up to something before we know the detail, I think all of the people who are involved in contracts and that tell you to read the fine detail and the fine print first. So I think if we are going to do this, we need to know everything before you do. So if you've been asked to write back before the 22nd and you don't have that, I think you should express concerns that you can't agree to anything without actually seeing what it is first.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I think as a council, we need to make it clear to the people who actually vote us into office that these cuts aren't of our choosing. 3.6 says we are actually being penalised even more in Dumfries and Galloway than it would have been anyway. And the Scottish Government have chosen to lay far more of the cuts on local councils than they've been subjected to by the Westminster. So I think we need to make clear that these aren't our choice in terms of the services which you're going to have to slash. It is a choice of the Scottish Government.
Rob?
Thank you, Leader. Process question, I think, really. Absolutely no concerns about you seeking clarification at all. I think it's very sensible. How will that, however, be reported back to members? Clearly, you will come back with information, but we will require to make collective decisions at the appropriate time. So how will that clarification you achieve then be reported back to us?
I think, given the proximity to budget setting, I think what is appropriate is that as soon as any further information and clarification on the requirements and any penalties is received, that should go out to all members. I'll make sure that's issued to all members as soon as that's received. Just similar to what we've been providing further budget information to members over the course of the current budget process.
Thanks, Chair. I assume from what has been said, if we again fail to reach the threshold for teacher numbers, we don't actually know how much we will be penalised.
I think part of the clarity, Jim, is that we don't actually know what it means at the moment, and that's some of the clarification that the numbers are there, but what it actually means, because they're talking about national figures now as well, so we don't actually know what that means, to us. Billy?
Yeah, Chair, as most are saying, or everyone that's spoken so far has said, that I think we should be seeking clarification, and it's right and proper for you to do so. Again, in terms of how it's going to affect Dumfries and Galloway against all other authorities, as he pointed out, we seem to be penalised in the distribution by a fair amount, and on your calculation, had it been a bit fairer, we could have at least been looking at a different settlement entirely. Any idea, Ronnie, just from the authorities that are affiliated or are members of COSLA, what their feelings are on the matter. I know from, as I'm sure everyone heard the news last night, the Scottish news, Maury seems to be saying that they're not prepared to accept the settlement and going alone in terms of fixing its own budget. Notwithstanding, what we've got, or rather standing what we've got, to try and find 21 million, just is it possible? Given, I know it can be possible, but we're looking at a different delivery of service almost against what we are trying to do in Dumfries and Galloway. Have you any idea what the general feeling is amongst COSLA members?
Well, what I can say is that COSLA finds it unacceptable, but and that's from the COSLA point of view, which represents the councils. Individually, they'll have their own issues and their own particular problems. So, but we've got to deal with what we've got.
Again, Jig, I hear what you're saying in terms of COSLA saying that it's unacceptable. Have they any planned action? Have they anything that they're going forward with to the Scottish Government that could direct us, give us some leadership, anything like that at all?
Well, as I said, COSLA is in discussions and they're being very robust about their ask. About the actual settlement and the issues involving that. They're being very robust as far as I'm aware. I won't be talking to other council leaders by the end of the week as well, myself, and finding out what's happening. But as Paul was saying, the negotiations are still on with the Scottish Government at the moment through COSLA. We've got Jim first.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. It's just really clarification and Paul's clarification. If I picked Paul up right, he said the 300,000 is a reduction from this year's budget. Is that this year 15-16 or this year 16-17? 15-16.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on the 7.6 million. Well, it's to do with the additional £250 million in terms of health and social care partnerships. It says in the report, 3.13, page 13, that the NHS Dumfries and Galloway share of this 7.6, is it the NHS or is it the Health and Social Care Partnership Board that will get the 7.6 million?
This is part of the clarification. I'll let Paul answer that, but the £7.6 million is our share of not our share, it's the allocation to Dumfries and Galloway and it's going through the health service. So, but it's within that £7.6 million, how the Scottish Government defines how that can be used that would affect our budget. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you, Leader, and I'll welcome any additional comment from Paul.
Just to add to that, the technical answer is that 7.6 million will be paid through the NHS funding settlement, but it has been indicated that it's specifically for social care support and to go to the integrated joint boards. So that's something we're discussing with the health service at the moment.
Ivor.
Chair, the Deputy First Minister's letter is quite specific that he's asking council leaders who do not intend to accept the proposals to write to him by the 22nd. By writing a letter saying that we would like further information, will he then interpret that as we aren't actually explicitly saying we don't intend, therefore we are intending, if you know what I mean? Because you're not actually saying, that's what he's asked, you're not going to accept it, send me a letter. If you're saying, well, we would like further information before we make that decision, are we actually saying, because we haven't done it on the deadline, we are accepting?
Well, I'll come to that, when we're going to the recommendations, but basically what we're saying is that until there is a clarity on a number of matters, currently being discussed with COSLA. We're not in a position to respond to the offer contained in his letter. Yep.
In discussions with other chief executives and in the wording that was used at the time, it was clearly implicit that anyone who didn't write was tacitly signing up, and the government will then put the budget together on the basis that everybody else has signed up. What the leader is suggesting is that actually we need to write saying we wish further time before we can take such a decision, so a budget is not prepared before Parliament, which we would then come in late. So it's to say that we have reservations, but everybody has read the letter from the First Minister, and as it's implicit that you will be accepting if you do not write, and he will proceed to produce a budget in the case. And we wouldn't want the council, when setting its budget, to come in late after the government has proceeded to set a budget. That would be the wrong for us to do. So that's the position. It's deemed that you accept if you do not write.
Okay, Jeff.
Just for clarification, I'm sure it will be covered by the response you get from the Deputy First Minister. I mean, Murray seem to be assuming if they don't freeze the council tax, they'll only lose their share of the 70 million. But looking at paragraph 3.12, adding all these different tranches together, what they're risking is losing the share of 158 million rather than 70 million. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. It's actually something I spoke to COSLA again about this morning. In the kind of press coverage of the Murray consideration, they're talking specifically about their share of the £70 million, but both the settlement circular and the supporting letter talk about these being a package of measures. So basically, if you don't sign up to the package, you're potentially rejecting the overall settlement. So that's one of the things that we are waiting for further clarification on. What are the specific penalties if there's individual elements of the requirements not addressed?
Yeah, was that not the same as last year's budget? And according to the government and their stance, we failed on the teacher numbers, therefore we would have lost our share of the council tax and whatever other funding was available last year, but we didn't, so it must be an individual unless they change it this year.
I think that's exactly what we need. We need to see the implications of everything that comes to us. Okay, can we go to the recommendations? Can we agree to note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3? And however, I would also like to propose that we add a fourth and fifth point, which is 2.4, to agree that the leader responds to the Deputy First Minister's letter of the 16th of December 2015 in the following terms. 2.4.1, confirming that there is clarity on a number of matters currently being discussed with COSLA, we are not in a position to respond to the offer contained in his letter. 2.4.2, expressing serious concern at the unacceptable level of resources being offered to this council, considering the commitments we are required to achieve. 2.4.3, seeking clarity in the requirements for use of the £250 million allocated for health and social care, and indicate that without that information we cannot properly consider these resources in our budget. 2.4.4, highlighting that conditions in offer on maintaining teacher numbers are far from clear, and requesting more detailed information on these matters to assess the impact on remaining budgets and services. And 2.5, another one, given the likely impact of the local government finance settlement on council services and staff, we agree that the Chief Executive should open formal discussions with the joint trade unions on how the council and staff side can work together to mitigate the impact of budget cuts. Well,
yeah, could I just seek clarification, and it may not be the place to come to a decision, but just on 2.4, where you're asking for clarity in terms of teacher numbers. Given that the authority has been offered the 20 plus 10, the 30 places on Grow Your Own, are we in a position to accept and move forward on those without, you know, the implication of the budget?
My answer would probably no, but we know. Paul?
Sorry, I have to apologise. Can you repeat the question, please, Councillor?
Yeah, it's been announced that we could have an opportunity of having a further Grow Your Own 30 places within the Grow Your Own initiative that we've taken in last year, where there were 20. Notwithstanding the remarks made by Ronnie in the additional recommendations, I just want to ask if we were in a position, notwithstanding we haven't set the budget and seeking clarification, to accept those 30 places.
I'm not aware of the detail of the announcement, but happy to have a look into that. But I would say largely difficult to take those kind of decisions at this stage before the budget's set, but happy to have a look into that in a bit more detail.
Jeff?
I think that's separate from the actual budget process itself. So.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. It's regarding your proposal for 2.5 and the Chief Executive to open discussions with the joint trade unions on ways of working together. Just exactly what does that mean? What is the Chief Executive, what permission are we giving the Chief Executive to actually ask the trade unions to do?
We're asking them to go into discussions. It's inevitable, you know, a substantial part of the council budget relates to staffing. So it's inevitable that, you know, any budget we set will have a massive impact on our staff. You know, so that's why I've put that other point in for agreement, so that they can actually discuss, you know, going in and have a discussion with the staff.
Yeah, Chair, and I do believe one of the trade unions has written to members of the council, elected members of the council, where they are asking that indeed we use a great deal, if not all, our reserves. I know there's a figure that we can only go down in 2% of prudence, but we this council in the past has done so in looking at using a great deal of its reserves, and I just wonder if that could be explored and for advice to be given in terms of that we look at the reserves and how much we can use, if not indeed we can use it all.
I certainly all options are available to members in considering the budget. I would have to strongly advise that the use of reserves only doubles your saving for the following year, and there's no indication from the settlement from Westminster that we have anything but further cuts to come. So using our reserves now would put us in a very difficult position to respond to events such as the winter, where we are going to have to dip into funds because the total cost will not be recovered. So I think obviously all information on our finances will be available to members in setting the budget, but I'd have to strongly advise, had this been a one-off, we might have gone there to smooth the effect, but the forecast is that cuts similar to this will be represented in future budgets just based on the Westminster announcements. So I think we will obviously advise individual members and groups accordingly over the next 2 to 3 weeks to make sure all information is available.
Will it?
Yeah, Chair, and I hear what the Chief Executive says and his advice on that matter. Nevertheless, politics is a changing feast, and indeed we've got elections in the Scottish Parliament next year. This is a one-year budget, and no doubt, in my mind, there will be changes in terms of local government taxes and so forth and so on, and there's been talk of that already. So this could be a one-off year in terms of council tax perhaps changing in terms of how they raise it, and it is could be a devolved issue or further powers to a Scottish Parliament to enact that.
Ian?
Thanks, Leader. It just goes back to the point I think what Jim raised. I was curious when he raised that as well within the recommendation. I think it's right that the Chief Executive should confer with the joint trade unions. I think he actually does as well. But there was just reflecting back, I want to get an update on it in regards to the joint consultative group made a decision in regards to meeting with the joint trade unions, and that was to come forward. I don't think we've heard anything about that yet, because I think it's important that the political groups do get the chance to meet with the joint trade unions as well. But there was a decision made at that joint consultative group. I wonder if we've got any update on that, please.
I was anticipating that members would be coming forward with areas they wish to cut. That has not so far come forward. So therefore, I didn't have authority to meet with trade unions to discuss matters that are subject to members' consideration. What I'm asking is permission to have discussions with the elected members on the anticipation that guidance will come from elected members up to setting the budget. It's just so I didn't go ahead of members' consideration. If I was out of discussing terms and conditions changes, etc., without member approval, I put myself in a different position. All I'm asking for permission to have that within the context of no compulsory redundancy, that she can not to do that, etc. So I can start those conversations and perhaps feed into members' considerations. I was just very conscious that members hadn't given me permission to do so. So I was asking for an advance of members considering the budget.
Ivan.
I'm going back to this letter that you're sending, which I agree with because I have concerns about actually signing something off or not signing it off without seeing the detail. But by sending a letter, according to this, he wants it by the 22nd of January to allow him to meet the timetable for his budget in late February. If we send a letter, because he's expecting letters from people who aren't accepting, is that tacitly us saying we're not accepting? Therefore, he then says, right, I can take your 1.8 million, your share of the teacher numbers and teacher funding, and your share of the 250, and put it where I want, because now I can go and you've not accepted it. And are we in an awkward position here whereby if we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't? Has he given assurance that a holding letter will be counted as a holding letter rather than tacit refusal?
What we are saying is we can't make a decision without the information back from the Scottish Government. It's as plain as that. But he can't make a decision. I don't know, and that's what we're saying. Gail?
Thank you, Leader. Just a very brief point, and it's going back to the three areas where there's additional funding and we could potentially be penalised for assorted reasons. We do need clarification on that because the 303 from last year, the indication is that we would lose everything, and I think that needs to be embedded within the letter, what the sanctions would be, and would they only be applied to each individual area or en bloc, because I think that would make a huge difference in our decision making going through the budget process.
Absolutely, that's the type of clarification that we actually need. Jeff?
Just on the back of that, if you recall the reply we got from John Swinney informing us that we're going to lose our share of the 10 million. He said he'd chosen to waive the fact that we could be fined for our share of the 41 million. So that was an option he'd actually exercised there. It wasn't built into it that it was going to be, specific savings of the 10 million and the 41 million, and equally not of the 70 million. So if he chose to, he could fine us across the board.
Jane?
Leader, of the three things here which are sort of in dispute, the council tax issue, the teacher numbers, and health and social care, two of them, the council tax and teacher numbers, I think the principle behind all this is that the Scottish Government is always, how should I say this, upset and indicates that that their destiny is not in their own hands. When we're dealing with something like council tax and the teacher numbers, we should, of course, be absolutely mindful of what legitimately the Scottish Government is trying to achieve in terms of policy. That's absolutely right, because they are legitimately elected. But there's always the principle of subsidiarity. There's always the principle of saying that while mindful of these policy decisions, do they not realise that actual fact, in exactly the same way as they object to how they are directed by Westminster, we equally have a perfect right to say that in some senses we could probably assist them in their policy direction if we were not dealing with one hand tied behind our back. And I would like to get that into that letter in some shape or form in a polite manner, But there is really an issue where we should point this out and say, we will try and work with you. We have tried to work with you, particularly in the teacher issues. But if they persist in ignoring the fact that exactly the same argument pervades with them at Westminster and with us and them, we're going to have continuous difficulties.
I'll take that on board. We have vocally, raised concerns, but we haven't had no positive feedback from that. But I can phrase something in the letter as well. Tom?
Perhaps the argument should be it's not the number of teachers, it's the number of teaching posts. And that should be the yardstick. Not the number of teachers on a given day, the number of teaching posts. And that'd be the fairest way to do it. And they're just being totally perverse.
Okay, is everybody happy with the additional recommendations? Yep. Okay, thank you. If we can go on to item 5, which is resource in the change fund and review reserves. Members will recall that to enable this council to achieve its financial plans and deliver savings, we recognise the need to identify funding to support investment in change. The establishment and use of the change fund has allowed the council to successfully achieve financial balance despite facing year-on-year reducing resources. This report today presents an assessment of the current change fund resources and a forecast of further funding required to help us meet the massive increased savings we have to make. In supporting our considerations and providing options to develop our budget, officers have identified some funding which can be released to the change fund to help us to start to address the cuts the council faces. Paul's here to deal with any queries arising from the report. Members? Ivor first, then Stephen.
Chair, I take it, just to show that I was listening at the seminar, these service reserves are held in the capital account just now to reduce capital borrowing. When we bring them back, what is the cost, or would it be more prudent to bring them back and pay the revenue charges on the capital rather than actually have to make more cuts to identify extra savings?
They're not actually held in the capital account, they're held in service reserves, but they do actually reduce their borrowing because we have internal monies to offset external borrowing. A couple of things. One, we do pay a small rate of interest on our internal borrowing as well, but I think the key point is that we're actually able to borrow at very, very low rates at the moment, so there'll be absolutely no material impact at all from actually utilising these reserves.
Stephen?
Thank you, Leader. It's just a question on the change fund for the 8 million 2015-16 savings is projected at 3.5 million in terms of ERVS costs, but I'm just wondering for 2016-17 year, even before we get to the looking for releasing additional amounts, what would the change fund requirement have been for the 8 million component prior to the additional 13 million we need to find?
I mean, roughly, obviously things vary year on year, but largely it's been cost us in the region of £2.5 to £3 million to achieve £8 million worth of savings. Does that answer your?
And just to come back on that, thank you. So the 8 million, it's not what would you say? That savings already been made, so it's not like a recurring saving. So it's the 8 million we still have to find. So there's a 2.5 to £3 million change fund requirement for that, even before we get to the 13 million for 2016-17. What I'm getting at is there's 8 million already been identified this year, and that's got a cost attached to it. That 8 million, there's an 8 million already identified for 2016-17 plus an additional 13 million. So you're suggesting that it's about 7.5 million needed to finance that. The sums that you're talking about releasing show that there's only 0.979 would have been available even to find the 8 million that we'd already agreed. So I'm just wondering how that would have been dealt with quite before the 13 million additional.
Absolutely. I think what we've done year on year and what we're intending doing again was look for opportunities. It's actually something you've agreed as a policy decision that any surpluses at a corporate level are transferred to the change fund to try and get us to £3 million each year. So we make further savings through the monitoring. We would put that into the change fund. When we did the review of reserves, which we were always anticipating doing, that would have gone in there as well. So I think we would still have had a similar exercise, but not with the same level of requirement if we've been seeking the same level of savings we previously were anticipating.
Willie first, then Ivory.
Yeah, Chair, it's really looking at this equal pay 5.2 and 5.3, and indeed that regarded here that the outstanding amounts settled in 2015 left us with some 3 million that was transferred to service reserves, and then it goes on in 5.3 to say while there are potential liabilities in relation to the number of staff-related issues. Are any of these staff-related issues to do with equal pay? Because as we all know, or maybe we don't, but I know there are still a number of disgruntled and dissatisfied employees who were not included in that equal pay. Do we anticipate a claim coming in by any of those dissatisfied employees?
That £1 million allowance is a general allowance. It's not specifically attached. Previously, a provision was attached to specific equal pay claims. This is more a general allowance in recognition of some of the risks the council faces. But there's a number of issues here, including things like the travel time directive, the impact of new rules for part-time workers with multiple contracts. So it's not specific to equal pay. There's a range of, it's a general allowance for a range of employment-related issues that we're currently looking at.
Ivory.
It's with regard to the unapplied grant funding at 5.4. Now, going back to an early budget when I was a young councillor, getting greyer and less hair now, one of the councillors found a reserve, or I think it was under bad debt provision of 500,000, which was an unspecified grant that hadn't been used. The then Director of Finance wasn't too happy that we were going to use it as a budget saving. I know there's been changes in finance rules. The reason being that the chance of that 500,000 may have been clawed back. Because it's a specific grant, I hope there's no chance of this being asked for back in the future.
Yeah. No, there's no prospect of that. They're not specific grants. They're general allocations that we've had to basically set aside within the overall grant total. I think the other important point to recognise is that it's not that we've not spent or invested sufficiently in these initiatives. It's actually the fact that the council were already budgeting for and investing in these before they became national policy initiatives and funded on that basis. That's the reason why the money is available.
Yeah, I think that's well explained in the surplus of the grants and that, and how it came about in the appendix. I mean, we've actually been very proactive in the way we've been doing things. For example, the council tax reduction that came, and that we've actually had that first. We've been spending the money first, and then later on the Scottish Government came in and gave us the money, but eventually. And as well as others, it was the same with the free school meals before that as well. We had the free school meals first, and then later on when that came in, we were already paying money out from us. I mean, I wish other people that go in the press and that understand that kind of concept rather than actually telling lies about things, and that's basically the way it is. But yeah, Jane.
Feeling quite nostalgic with either talking about previous directors of education, of finance, who used to turn them upside down, and lo, the budget problems were solved. I just want to ask, 4.4, the project commitments of $7.75 million, could somebody just tell me briefly what those are? I mean, I presume there's one or two big ones in that.
Yeah, it's all specific initiatives that have been approved by this committee. There's an allocation to support the autism strategy. There's also an allocation to support property rationalisation arrangements, and also there's an allocation to support some high IT modernisation work within home care. So that's the kind of three main elements that are in there at the moment.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think it is important to emphasise that effectively Dumfries and Galloway have been taking the lead in these areas covered in Appendix 1, and we argue the Scottish Government are following our example. And there's been quite a lot of negative coverage in the press. And maybe just the people making the statements didn't actually understand where the money was coming from and what it was being used for. So could I suggest a copy of this report be sent to all the MPs and MSPs representing our region, just to make them be clear of what we have done and why we are doing it.
Quite sure we could do that. Stephen?
Thank you. It's just a question on the, for example, like the early years funding, where there's a wee bit left over, etc. It's just to get an assurance that you know, all the sort of childcare or the early years providers in our region, whether it's private or voluntary or otherwise, are actually getting the support that they would probably expect in terms of, for example, being living wage employers, etc. And that we're fully sort of signed up to that, and this is actually left over after seeing to that.
Without going into specifics about providers or things like that, I do know that we're fully meeting the requirements, and we've done so in a manner that has been both cost effective and recognises that we're already investing in those areas, and that's why that money is available at the moment. So it shouldn't undermine any of those kind of initiatives at all.
Tom?
I was just to support Jeff. I think it's all right. This is quite a good report, in particular the appendix, because I was quite concerned about the scurrilous reports appearing in the press from an ill-informed MSP concerning this council, when we were actually ahead of the game, rather than following the Scottish Government. And apart from saying this report, I think we should offer Miss McAlpine the right to come in and speak with Paul, because I appreciate she's not the brightest star in the SNP constellation, and perhaps a bit of personal tutoring might inform her better, and perhaps we might get our facts right in future.
Ivor?
Chair, maybe it would be an apt time to remind members that we are being recorded.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I was just going to suggest much the same as Councillor Hislop. We are being recorded. There's no need for personal insults. I think I'll leave it at that.
Well, if somebody thought I was being insulted, I do apologise.
Tom? Can we go to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, agree 2.2, and note 3? 2.3. Going to item 6, which is the Waverley Hall and Creetown report. This report asks members to consider the transfer of Waverley Hall and Creetown into community ownership for a nominal sum. Members of the Stewardship Area Committee had recommended to us that we support the community transfer, providing that the Creetown initiative secured external funding to upgrade the building and had a viable business plan. At paragraph 3.10, it's highlighted that the Creetown initiative has now secured considerable funding for their plans and have provided their justification for the asset transfer, which is included as Appendix 2 to this report. The Director of Communities at paragraph 3.13 also advises that the relevant application and business plan have been submitted and assessed by his officers and concluded that these are viable and sustainable. I think Louise is here to answer any questions arising with the report. Members? Jane?
Leader, all I would say is that I think we would be completely mad not to accept this. The only reason we would hang on to the Waverley Hall is in order to get a capital receipt. We tried that. There is no capital receipt to be received. So I would just ask all members to accept the recommendation.
Can we go to the recommendations? Can we note 1 and agree to? Item 7, which is disposal of land at former Caravan Park, Glasgow Road, Lockerbie. The council is committed to empower communities to make the most of their assets and the talent of people who live and work in our region. The report updates members on the progress of the development of a community facility, including a swimming pool by Lockerbie Swimming Pool and Leisure Centre Trust. The report also asks us to agree to enter into a contract with the Trust up until 2020 to transfer ownership of former Caravan site for the sum of £1, providing the Trust with more time to progress their development. Gail?
Sorry, just a very brief point, and it's really just a repeat of what we did the last time to give them a bit more time, but it does say at 3.4 that officers have met with the Trust and committed to offer support and development stages in pursuit of external funding. Do we know how recently they've met with them and how regularly? Because the last time I spoke to the Trust, they weren't aware that there was officer assistance still available, and it was just to have an assurance that they know that now and that they can keep in regular discussions with officers.
Okay.
Chair, yeah, thanks very much. The last meeting was in September, but we have regularly opened ourselves up for as many conversations as they see fit. Clearly, we've got an obligation to them to assist with trying to obtain funding from the major funding partners as well. And we facilitated tours to like the temporary swimming pool to look at modular options. So we have been speaking on a on-off ad hoc basis, but we're more than happy to engage on a regular, more frequent, formal basis if that's indeed what they're looking for.
That would be very useful. As I say, I think that actually our officers have done a really good job. They've been a bit reluctant to come back to the council because they were bruised from us not giving them funding. And I think if we can get that sort of exchange between the council and the group going better again, that might be more helpful. Thank you.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I assume the legally binding contract limits the use to which this land can be put.
Yes, Chair, it will do.
Jeff?
Just for clarification, we're agreeing to enter into a contract up until 11th of June 2020. What happens if it hasn't progressed beyond that date? Does ownership then revert back to the council?
Yes, the land remains in the council's ownership in any case. If they haven't progressed their development within the 3-year period of the planning permission, as is described at 3.3, we would seek to terminate at that stage. If they were clearly in progress before 2020, we would obviously seek to bring something back, but if nothing was, then it would be completely terminated.
Ivor?
Chair, has this site been actively marketed in the past? And if it has, is there any interest? Now, it's a terrible thing to say, but to progress this, I think they're going to have to look at funding it themselves. I don't see us having any revenue funding to support it in the near future. And I believe there was a report came from Sport Scotland which showed that actually there was it 12 square metres of water required for additional swimming pools, which is 2 metres by 6 metres. I don't think that's a swimming pool. And if you're not going to get funding from Sport Scotland because they don't see it as a priority, what is the likelihood of this actually coming to fruition? And would we be better looking to actually put it on the market for sale? Because we have a capital plan to finance over the next few years, and I think it's been cut a wee bit. So what's the other options that we have here if we don't sign up?
Chair, the site has not been marketed in the recent past, so therefore we've got no indication of whether there would be any interest in that piece of ground from anybody else. We've not had any other approaches that I'm aware of in relation to the ground either. The group has made some progress since this Initial contract was agreed in October 2011, albeit it's slower than anticipated, but they have at least managed to get that planning permission in place. I believe that Mr Grant would be better placed to comment in relation to Sport Scotland's advice on swimming pool provision.
With regards to that, currently we have advised the Trust, obviously, of the outcome of the facility planning model that was run back in 2011, 2012. We're due to go through that exercise again with Sport Scotland because clearly the definitions have changed somewhat and populations obviously do change. But what I would say that the organisation is very proactive. They have identified some funding. There are a list within their business plan of about 8 or 9 different funding groups that they will be approaching and have already had initial discussions with. So in terms of the further development of the capital costs, I think there's some way down with those discussions already.
Okay, Ian.
Thanks, Chair. Leader, sorry. I was just going to say, I mean, I went to Lockerbie Academy myself. It was an aspiration back then to try and get a swimming pool in Lockerbie. I wouldn't have wanted to see it being stifled in any way whatsoever. I think this group has done a lot of work for a little bit of involvement in regards to the right letters to all the councils of the area committee, and happy to support this. And I would move the recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 just to give them that extra bit of time in order to get things into order, and hopefully they're successful with this.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I hear what Councillor Hislop's saying, but at the end of the day, if we go into the contract with this trust until 2020, if they don't get the money, they'll no build it, the land will come back to us, and at that point, we can actually do what we want with it. I would go with the recommendations as well.
Can we note 2.1 and agree 2? Okay. Okay, if we go on to item 8, which is the Scottish Parliamentary elections, this is a report by Gavin, returning officer. I'll open up to members. No? Can we go to the recommendations? Can we approve 2.1 and 2.2? Agree to delegate? Item 9, any other business? As I stated earlier on, everybody should have the extra paper in front of them just now. I don't know whether you want some time, 10 minutes. 10 minutes to have a look? Okay. Sorry? Go to the late report. Members will be aware of the progress of the Dalbeattie Learning Campus project was delayed as a result of the national issues associated with European legal and accounting issues. The resolution of these issues has resulted in an additional requirement in the Council in terms of the need to make a small investment in the holding company set up as part of the delivery project and to extend the period of investment in subordinated debt, which was previously approved by this committee for a shorter period based on requirements at that stage. The revised requirements are set out in the report, and members are asked to consider the report today as waiting until the next meeting will delay financial close in the project with resultant costs and programme implications. Claire and Paul are here to answer any questions. Members? Ivor?
Chair, it's with regard to the second recommendation. Is there any cost of going from 25 to 27 years? And we are moving forward to hopefully the phase 1. If it was to take 27 years and 2 months, would we not be better just setting a parameter of possibly 30 years, and therefore within the Treasury management we wouldn't need to come back and in case the meetings don't fall in the proper time for the future?
Yeah, there's no cost to the extension of the period, and in terms of the actual duration, I spoke to the Treasury Officer about this issue last night, and we're both of the view that extending it to 30 years would both tidier and would actually give us that bit of protection if there is a further delay. So I'd agree with that proposal.
Rob?
Thanks, Leader. I'm slightly worried that Councillor McCaughey might consider me stupid, but I'm going to jump in with both feet. Could you explain to me what it means, please?
Which one or both?
All of it, please.
I mean, I think basically we previously had agreement to move to financial close on the Dalbeattie Learning Campus project based on the requirements at that stage. There was a European accounting issue, which meant that the Office of National Statistics required a change to the project structure, and what we'd previously got in place was no longer sufficient to allow the project to progress. I think Claire and her team have been dealing with lawyers over the last few days to try and clarify issues, and we've managed to clarify everything apart from these two issues. We agreed a 25-year duration for our investment in subordinated debt. Because of the contract period, we now need to extend that to 27 or now 30 years. So there's no real major issue with that at all. The level of investment we're looking to make, it's only 1% of the project value, so it's around about £240,000 to £250,000, and it's at a very good interest rate. I think it's about 10.5% rate of interest we're getting in that. So that's the issue there. So it's just an extension to period of something we've already agreed in terms of subordinated debt. And the second issue is actually recommendation 1. Because of the revised requirements, they have to set up a DBFM holding company as part of delivery arrangements for the project. We are required to invest 10% of the equity capital of that company. That's only £1, so it's 10% at £1.10. So obviously there's no financial exposure really there. It's a technical issue, we have to get this in place.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Sorry about that. Hey, it's under 3.11. Just in plain language, what we're going to do is we're going to invest money in the sub-hub core, whatever it is, to build the school. During the build, we don't get any interest payments at all. During operation, we receive interest payments on what you said was our investment of 240,000, 250,000 at 10.6% per annum. And then in year 24, 25 of operation, we get our money back, probably split half and half each year. Is that, in plain language, what it is?
Gail?
Thank you, Leader. One tiny point on the front page, design, build, maintain and finance, and then we've got DBFM. Is it DBFM or is it DBMF? But that's just a tiny semantic point. I think for me, it's beginning to look a wee bit like a PPP in another guise. And that wasn't what I originally anticipated this particular design and build would be. My understanding was that we were going to get some funding from the Scottish Government. We would fund it partly out of our funds as well, through the HubCo, which was the process that was set up to do that. But it does say quite explicitly in 3.4 that the contract holding company to operate and maintain the building will run from completion of the building for a period of 25 years. Are we tying ourselves into a system now where, like the PPP schools, we could end up with problems with access, with maintenance, with expense? Is it completely different from that? Because, as I say, it's beginning to look like a PPP in disguise at the moment, and just clarification on that, from my understanding, would be helpful.
Thanks for pointing out there in terms of it's DBFM, so it's design, build, finance, maintain. That's my issue, so apologies for that. In terms of, I appreciate the familiarity that does emerge from this contract in terms of PPP, but there are very distinct changes in terms of this model being the next generation on from PPP. You do not pass the same level of ownership on to the PPP provider, so we are responsible for hard FM, facilities management and soft management services. So we're not transferring staff, they don't do all the work to the building, and we have more ability to influence and shape for the needs of our learners in our community.
Okay, can we move to the recommendations? We're asked to 2.1 grant authority, can we do that? And 2.2, there was a mention about 30 years. Can we have 30 years instead of 27 and agree with that? Okay. Thank you. No other business.